100 Ways to Motivate Yourself Part 2. 26. Run toward your fear. The world's best kept secret is that on 100 Ways to Motivate Yourself Part 2. 26. Run toward your fear. The world's best kept secret is that on the other side of your fear there is something safe and beneficial waiting for you. If you pass through even a thin curtain of fear, you will increase the confidence you have in your ability to create your life. General George Patton said, "Fear kills more people than death. Death kills us but once, and we usually don't even know it. But fear kills us over and over again, subtly at times and brutally at others. But if we keep trying to avoid our fears, they will chase us down like persistent dogs. The worst thing we can do is close our eyes and pretend they don't exist. Fear and pain, says psychologist Nathaniel Branden, should be treated as signals not to close our eyes, but to open them wider. By closing our eyes we end up in the darkest of comfort zones, buried alive." Janis Joplin's biography, which chronicled her death from alcohol and drug abuse, was aptly titled Buried Alive. To Janis, as to so many similarly troubled people, alcohol provided an artificial and tragically temporary antidote to fear. It is no accident that in the old frontier days the nickname for whiskey was false courage. There was a time in my life, not too many years ago, when my greatest fear of all was public speaking. It didn't even help that fear of speaking in front of people was people's number one fear, even greater than the fear of death. This fact once caused comedian Jerry Seinfeld to point out that most people would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy. For me, it ran even deeper than that. As a child I could not give oral book reports. I'd plead with my teachers to let me off the hook. I would offer to do 2, even 3 written book reports if I didn't have to do the oral one. Yet as my life went on, I wanted to be a public speaker more than anything. My dream was to teach people everywhere to learn the ideas that lead to self-motivation, the ideas that I had learned. But how could I ever do this if stage fright left me frozen with fear? Then one day, as I was driving in Phoenix flipping through the radio stations looking for good music, I accidentally happened upon a religious station where a histrionic preacher was yelling, "Run toward your fear. Run right at it." I hastened to change the station, but it was too late. Deep down I knew that I had just heard something I needed to hear. No matter what station I turned to, all I could hear was that madman's words, "Run toward your fear." The next day I still couldn't get it out of my mind, so I called a friend of mine who was an actress. I asked her to help me get into an acting class she had once told me about. I told her I thought I was ready to overcome my fear of performing in front of people. Although I lived in a high state of anxiety the first weeks of that class, there was no other way around my fear. There was no real way to run from it any longer, because the more I ran, the more pervasive it got. I knew I had to turn around and run toward the fear or I would never pass through it. Emerson once said, "The greater part of courage is having done it before," and that soon became true of my speaking in public. Fear of doing it can only be cured by doing it. And soon my confidence was built by doing it again and again. The rush we get after running through the waterfall of fear is the most energizing feeling in the world. If you are ever in an undermotivated mood, find something you fear and do it, and watch what happens. 27. Create the way you relate. We can't create our truest selves without creating relationships in the process. Relationships are everywhere. Relationships are everything. There is no end to relationship, said the Indian spiritual leader Krishnamurti. There may be the end of a particular relationship, but relationship can never end. To be is to be related. I have trained many corporations with a 4-part seminar series. The first 3 parts are on self-motivation, and the final part is on relationship building. Sometimes CEOs ask me up front, ahead of the training, if I don't have that ratio out of balance. Shouldn't you have more of it be on relationship building, they ask. After all, team building and customer relations are surely more important than self-motivation. I stand by my ratio. We can't relate to others if our relationship with ourselves is poor. A commitment to personal motivation comes first. Because who wants to have a relationship with someone who is not motivated in any way? When we do get to the 4th part, relationship building, the focus is on creativity. Creativity is the most neglected and yet most useful aspect of relationship building. In relationships most of us think with our emotions rather than our minds. But to think with our feelings instead of our minds puts us in the unresourceful state that Colin Wilson describes as being upside down. When we view relationships as opportunities for creativity, they always get better. When our relationships get better, we are even more motivated. My youngest daughter, Margie, was in 4th grade when a very shy girl in her class accidentally put a large black mark on her own nose with an indelible marker. Many of the kids in the class pointed at her and started to laugh. The little girl was finally reduced to tears of embarrassment. At some point Margie walked over to the girl to give her some comfort. Margie's astonished teacher related this story to me. Impulsively, Margie picked up the marker and marked her own nose, and then handed the marker to another classmate and said, "I like my nose this way. What about you?" In a few moments the entire class had black marks on their noses, and the shy girl who was once crying was laughing. At recess, Margie's class all went out on the playground with marked noses, and they were the envy of the school, obviously into something unusual and cool. This story is interesting to me because of how Margie used her creativity and her mind instead of her emotions to solve a problem. She elevated herself up into her mind, where something clever could be done. If she had used her feelings to think with, she might have expressed anger at the class for laughing at the girl, or sadness and depression. Anytime you take a relationship problem up into the mind, you have unlimited opportunities to get creative. Conversely, when you send a relationship problem down the elevator into the lower half of the heart, you risk staying stuck in the problem forever. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't feel anything. Feel everything. Notice your feelings. Just don't think with them. When there's a relationship problem to be solved, travel up your ladder to the most creative you. You'll soon realize that we create the relationships we have in our lives. They don't just happen. "We are each of us angels with only one wing," said the Italian artist Luciano de Crescenzo, "and we can only fly embracing each other." 28. Try interactive listening. The principle of using interactivity as a creativity builder is not restricted to computer games or chat rooms. Once we become fully conscious of this principle, we can find ways to become more interactive everywhere. We can even make conversations with our family and friends more interactive than they once were. We all have certain business associates or family members that we think of as we do television sets. As they speak to us, we have a feeling that we already know what they're going to say. This lowers our own consciousness level, and a form of mental laziness sets in. Whereas in the past we might have just passively suffered through other people's monologues, we can now begin introducing more interactivity. In the past we might have punctuated our sleepy listening with meaningless words and phrases, such as "exactly" and "there you go." But we weren't truly listening. But that passive approach shortchanges ourselves and the people we are listening to. When we are listened to, wrote Brenda Oland, it creates us, makes us unfold and expand. Ideas actually begin to grow within us and come to life. The more thoughtful our questions get to be, the more interactive the conversations. Look for opportunities for interactivity to motivate yourself to higher levels of experience. 29. Embrace your willpower. I can't tell you how many people have told me that they have no willpower. Do you think the same thing? If you think you have no willpower, you are undermining your own success. Everyone has willpower. To be reading this sentence, you must have willpower. The first step in developing your willpower, therefore, is to accept its existence. You have willpower just as surely as you have life. If someone were to put a large barbell weight on the floor in front of you and ask you to lift it and you knew you could not, you would not say, "I have no strength." You'd say, "I'm not strong enough." Not strong enough is more truthful language, because it implies that you could be strong enough if you worked at it. It also implies that you do have strength. It is the same with willpower. Of course you have willpower. When you accept that little piece of chocolate cake, it is not because you have no willpower. It is only because you choose not to exercise it in that instance. The first step toward building willpower is to celebrate the fact that you've got it. You've got willpower, just like that muscle in your arm. It might not be a very strong muscle, but you do have that muscle. The second step is to know that your willpower, like a muscle in your arm, is yours to develop. You are in charge of making it strong or letting it atrophy. It is not grown by random external circumstances. Willpower is a deliberate volitional process. When I left college to join the Army, one of the reasons I decided to sign up was because I thought it might help teach me to develop my self-discipline. But somehow I had not been aware of the self-discipline. I wanted discipline to be given to me by someone else. I found out in boot camp that others do not give willpower and self-discipline. The drill sergeant might have been persuasive and inspiring, or at times terrifying, but he couldn't make me do anything until I decided to do it. Nothing happened until I generated the will to make it happen. Make a promise to yourself to be clear and truthful about your own willpower. It is always there. 30. Perform your little rituals. See yourself as a shaman or medicine man who needs to dance and sing to get the healing started. Make up a ritual that is yours and yours alone, a ritual that will be your own shortcut to self-motivation. As you read through these various ways to motivate yourself, you might have noticed that action is often the key. Doing something is what leads to doing something. It's a law of the universe. An object in motion stays in motion. Rituals. The great basketball player Jack Twyman used to begin each practice session by getting to the court early and taking 200 shots at the basket. It always had to be 200 shots, which he counted out, and it didn't matter if he already felt tuned up after 20 or 30 shots. He had to shoot 200. It was his ritual, and it always got him into a state of self-motivation for the rest of the practice session or game. My friend Fred Knight, now an Emmy award-winning television writer and comedian, does something he calls driving for ideas. When he has a major creative project to accomplish, he gets in his car and drives around the desert near Tucson until ideas begin to come to him. His theory is that the act of driving gives the anxious, logical left side of his brain something to do so the right side of his brain can be freed up to suggest ideas. It's like giving your child some toys to play with so you can read the evening email on your computer. In his book about songwriting, Right from the Heart, Jon Stewart writes about composer and arranger Glenn Gould, who had a ritual for finding a new melody or musical idea when he seemed to be stuck and nothing was coming. He'd turn on 2 or 3 radios at the same time, all to different stations. He'd sit and compose his own music while listening to music on the 3 radios. This would short-circuit his conscious mind and free up the creative subconscious. It would overload the left side of his brain so the right could open up and create without judgment. My own ritual for jump-starting self-motivation is walking. Many times in my life I have had a problem that seemed too overwhelming to do anything about, and my ritual is to take the problem out for a long, long walk. Sometimes I won't come back for hours. But time and again during the course of my walk something comes out of nowhere, some idea for an action that will quickly solve the problem. One of the reasons I think this ritual works for me is that a ritual is action. Starting a ritual is taking an action that leads toward finding the solution. The dancing medicine man is already doing something. Make up little rituals for yourself that will act as self-starters. They will have you in action before you feel like getting into action. Rituals always override your built-in hesitation so that you can get yourself motivated in a predictable, controllable way. If you are not a writer or painter or poet, you might be thinking right now that this does not apply to you. But that's what I would call the creative fallacy. In fact, your entire life is yours to create. There are no creative professions that stand apart from others, like an exclusive club. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, "Be an artist at whatever you do." Even if you are a street sweeper, be the Michelangelo of street sweepers. 31. Find a place to come from. Most people think they'll feel good once they reach some goal. They think happiness is out there somewhere, perhaps not even too far away, but out there all the same. The problem with putting off feeling good about yourself until you hit a certain goal is that it may never happen. And you know all the time you're striving for it that it may never happen. So, by linking your happiness to something you don't have yet, you're denying your power to create happiness for yourself. A lot of people use personal unhappiness as a tool, as proof of their own sincerity and compassion. Yet, as Barry Kaufman points out eloquently into Love is to be happy with, being unhappy is not necessary. You can be happy and also be sincere. You can be happy and also be compassionate. In fact, loving someone while you are unhappy does not show up like love at all. Love, says the great American spiritual teacher, Emmett Fox, acts the part. Songwriter Fred Knight talked to me recently about how we human beings have learned to use and abuse unhappiness. He said he had made a list for me of the secret reasons why people think they should feel bad. If I feel bad, then that proves I am a good person, he said. Or, if I feel bad, I am responsible. If I feel bad, I'm not hurting anybody. If I feel bad, it means that I care. Maybe if I feel bad, it proves I'm being realistic and aware. If I feel bad, it means I'm working on something. That list gives us powerful motivation to be unhappy. But as Werner Erhard, personal transformation pioneer, has always taught in his well-known seminars, happiness is a place to come from, not to try to go to. I once saw Larry King interviewing Werner Erhard by satellite from Russia, where Erhard was living and working. Erhard had mentioned that he might be moving back to the United States soon, and Larry King asked him if coming home would make him happy. Erhard paused uncomfortably, because in his view of life nothing makes us happy. He finally said, "Larry, I am already happy. That wouldn't make me happy, because I come from happiness to whatever I do." Your happiness is your birthright. It shouldn't depend on your achieving something. Start by claiming it and using it to make your self-motivation fun all the way and not just fun at the end. 32. Be your own disciple. So, why do I claim we have no willpower? Is it a misguided desire to protect myself? Is there a secret payoff in saying I have no willpower? Maybe if I absolutely deny the existence of willpower, I am no longer responsible for developing it. It's out of my life. What a relief! But, here's the final tragedy: the development and use of willpower is the most direct access to happiness and motivation that I'll ever have. In short, by denying its existence, I'm shutting my spirit down. Many people think of willpower and self-discipline as something akin to self-punishment. By giving it that negative connotation, they never get enthused about developing it. But author William Bennett gives us a different way to think of it. Self-discipline, he notes in the Book of Virtues, comes from the word disciple. When you are self-disciplined, you have simply decided, in matters of the will, to become your own disciple. Once you make that decision, your life's adventure gets more interesting. You start to see yourself as a stronger person. You gain self-respect. American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson used to talk about the Sandwich Island warriors who believed that when they killed an enemy tribesman, the courage of that dead enemy passed into the warrior's living body. Emerson said that the same thing happens to us when we say no to a temptation. The power of that dead temptation passes into us. It strengthens our will. When we resist a small temptation, we take on a small power. When we resist a huge temptation, we take on huge power. William James recommended that we do at least 2 things every day that we don't want to do for the very reason that we don't want to do them, just to keep willpower alive. By doing this, we maintain our awareness of our own will. 33. Turn into a word processor. If you associate the word willpower with negative things, such as harsh self-denial and punishment, you will weaken your resolve to build it. To increase your resolve, it's often useful to think of new word associations. To weightlifters, failure is success. Unless they lift a weight to the point of failure, their muscles aren't growing. So they have programmed themselves, through repetition, to use the word failure in a positive sense. They also call what we would call pain something positive, the burn. Getting to the burn is the goal. You'll hear bodybuilders call out to each other, roast 'em. By consciously using motivated language, they acquire access to inner power through the use of the human will. Zen philosopher and scholar Alan Watts also used to hate the word discipline because it had so many negative connotations. Yet he knew that the key to enjoying any activity was in the discipline. So he would substitute the word skill for discipline, and when he did that he was able to develop his own self-discipline. Language leads to power, so be conscious of the creative potential of the language you use, and guide it in the direction of more personal power. 34. Program your biocomputer. If you're a regular consumer of the major news programs, you belong to a very persuasive and hypnotic cult. You need to be de-programmed. Start by altering how you listen to electronic radio gossip, the news, and shock and schlock TV shows. Program out all the negative, cynical, and skeptical thoughts that you now allow to flow into your mind unchecked when you hear the news. Headless woman found in topless bar. That was an actual headline in a daily New York City newspaper. I used to work for a city newspaper, and I remember how hard the editors in the newsroom would search for the most shocking stories they could find. The news is not the news. It is the bad news. It is deliberate shock. The more you accept it as the news, the more you believe that that's the way it is, and the more fearful and cynical you will become. If we realized exactly how much vulgar, pessimistic, and manipulative negativity was deliberately packed into every daily newspaper and most television shows and Hollywood movies, we would resist the temptation to flood our brains with their garbage. Most of us are more particular about what we put in our automobile's gas tank than we are about what we put in our own brain every night. We passively feed ourselves with stories about serial killers and violent crime without any conscious awareness of the choice we're making. How do we change it? By worrying about it? No. Rather than fretting about crime and apathy and whatever you wish would change in the world, it's often very motivational to heed the words of Gandhi, who said, "You must be the change you wish to see." San Francisco writer and musician Gary Lockman wrote a captivating essay called World Rejection and Criminal Romantics, in which he observed, "It's the Ted Bundys that get television coverage, not the thousands of self-actualizers who work away at self-transformation quietly and anonymously. And it's their influence, not that of the Ted Bundys, that will shape the face of the coming century." Often we don't have an opportunity to skip the media reports of crime and scandal, so it's important that we listen in a way that always programs out the effect. We are pretty good at doing this when we pass the tabloids in the grocery store checkout line. We smile at them even before reading that aliens are living in the White House. We need to take that same attitude toward what passes as serious media. Once you've gotten good at factoring out the negative aspects of the media today, take it a step further, make your own news. Be your own breaking story. Don't look to the media to tell you what's happening in your life. Be what's happening. 35. Open your present. Practice being awake in the present moment. Make the most of your awareness of this hour. Don't live in the past, unless you want guilt, or worry about the future, unless you want fear, but stay focused on today, in case you want happiness. Until you can put your attention where you want it, said Emmett Fox, you have not become master of yourself. You will never be happy until you can determine what you are going to think about for the next hour. There is a time for dreaming, planning, and creative goal setting. But once you are complete with that, learn to live in the here and now. See your whole life as being contained in this very hour. Let the microcosm become the macrocosm. Live the words of the poet William Blake and his description of enlightenment. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Sir Walter Scott said he would trade whole years filled with mindless conformity for 1 hour of life crowded to the full with glorious action, and filled with noble risks. It's amazing what can be done by people who learn to relax, pay attention, and focus, appreciating the present hour and all the opportunity it contains. It is said that in America we try to cultivate an appreciation of art, while the Japanese cultivate the art of appreciation. You, too, can cultivate the art of appreciation. Appreciate this hour. This hour, right now, is pure opportunity. The great French philosopher Voltaire was on his deathbed when someone asked him, if you had 24 more hours to live, how would you live them? Voltaire said, one at a time. 36. Be a good detective. In your professional life, whatever it is, always be curious. When you meet with someone, think of yourself as a bumbling but friendly private detective. Ask questions, then ask follow-up questions, and then let the answers make you even more curious. Let the answers suggest even more questions. This will motivate you to higher levels of consciousness and interest. When you prepare a meeting with someone, prepare your questions. Cultivate your curiosity. Don't ever be at a loss for questions to ask. Most of us do the opposite. We prepare our answers. We rehearse what we are going to say. We polish our presentation and strengthen it, not realizing that our host would much rather talk than listen to us. If you are in business, you know that when prospective customers contract for long-term services, they want a company that's truly interested in them, that understands them, that will be a good consultant to them. To show a prospect that you are genuinely interested, you must be the person who asks the most thoughtful questions. To convince a company that you understand it, you will ask the best follow-up questions based on its answers. To convince a company that you will be a good consultant to them over the course of the contract, you will have outlearned your competitors by the inventiveness and quantity of your questions. Your curiosity will get you the business. But you can't just rely on impulsive, on-the-spot questioning. Being prepared is the secret. Preparing your questions is even more important than preparing the presentation of your services. Indiana's former basketball coach Bobby Knight always said, "The will to win is not as important as the will to prepare to win." This is not only useful in business. If you are about to have an important conversation with your spouse or teenager, it is very useful to prepare your curiosity rather than your presentation. When you prepare your curiosity, you always seem to have one more question to ask before you leave, just like Lieutenant Columbo from the old TV show now showing in reruns on cable. As the character played by Peter Falk, Columbo disarmed his subjects by asking so many seemingly impromptu questions. Like a disorganized but innocently charming child, he would ask about the tiniest things. As he prepared to leave, he always paused at the door, as if absent-mindedly remembering something he forgot to ask. "Excuse me, sir," he would say, apologetically. "Would it inconvenience you if I asked you one more question?" Great relationship builders ultimately learn that the sale most often goes to the most interested party, and the quantity and quality of your questions will measure your level of interest. You might be thinking that this doesn't apply so much to you because you're not in business, or you don't sell for a living. But heed the words of Robert Louis Stevenson, everybody lives by selling something. In Follow the Yellow Brick Road, Richard Saul Wurman writes about physicist Isidore Isaac Rabi, who won a Nobel Prize for inventing a technique that permitted scientists to probe the structure of atoms and molecules in the 1930s. Rabi attributed his success in physics to the way his mother used to greet him when he came home from school each day. "Did you ask any good questions today, Isaac?" By asking questions in your relationships, you are already creating the relationship, and you are already self-motivated. You don't have to wait for the other person to make it happen. 37. Make a relationship. Motivate yourself by giving someone else the ideas necessary for self-motivation. You can have any experience you want in life simply by giving that experience away to someone else. John Lennon called it instant karma. In most of our relationships we stay focused on ourselves. We're fascinated by how we're coming off. We're constantly monitoring what others must now be thinking of us. We live as if mirrors surround us. Norman Vincent Peale used to observe that shy people were the greatest egomaniacs on earth, because they were so focused on themselves. You can see that when you observe the body language of a shy person. The looking down and turning in. The curling up with self-consciousness as if surrounded by mirrors. When we shift our focus to the other person in the relationship, something paradoxically powerful happens. By forgetting ourselves, we start to grow. I have developed an entire seminar around this one shift. It is called Relation Shift. Spencer Johnson, author of The 1-Minute Salesperson, calls it the wonderful paradox. I have more fun and enjoy more financial success when I stop trying to get what I want and start helping other people get what they want. If you want to be motivated, shift your inspiration to someone else. Point out the strengths of the other individual to him or her. Offer encouragement and support. Offer guidance in his or her own. Self-motivation. Watch what it does for you. 38. Learn to come from behind. Progress toward your goals is never going to be a straight line. It will always be a bumpy line. You'll go up and then come down a little. 2 steps forward and 1 step back. There's a good rhythm in that. It is like a dance. There's no rhythm in a straight line upward. However, people get discouraged when they slide a step back after 2 steps forward. They think they are failing and that they've lost it. But they have not. They're simply in step with the natural rhythm of progress. Once you understand this rhythm, you can work with it instead of against it. You can plan the step back. In The Power of Optimism, Alan Loy McGuinness identifies the characteristics of tough-minded optimists, and one of the most important is that optimists always plan for renewal. They know in advance that they are going to run out of energy. In physics, says McGuinness, the law of entropy says that all systems, left unattended, will run down. Unless new energy is pumped in, the organism will disintegrate. Pessimists don't want to plan for renewal, because they don't think there should have to be any. Pessimists are all-or-nothing thinkers. They're always offended when the world is not perfect. They think taking a step backward means something negative about the whole project. If this were a good marriage, we wouldn't have to rekindle the romance, a pessimist would say, dismissing the idea of taking a second honeymoon. But an optimist knows that there will be ups and downs. And an optimist isn't scared or discouraged by the downs. In fact, an optimist plans for the downs and prepares creative ways to deal with them. You can schedule your own comebacks. You can look ahead on your calendar and block out time to refresh and renew and recover. Even if you feel very up right now, it's smart to plan for renewal. Schedule your own comeback while you're on top. Build in big periods of time to get away, even to get away from what you love. If you catch yourself thinking that you are too old to do something you want to do, recognize that you are now listening to the pessimistic voice inside of you. It is not the voice of truth. You can talk back. You can remind the voice of all the people in life who have started their lives over again at any age they wanted to. John Houseman, the Emmy Award-winning actor in The Paper Chase, started acting professionally when he was in his 70s. I had a friend named Art Hill, who spent most of his life in advertising. In his heart, however, he always wanted to be a writer. So in his late 50s, he wrote 2 books that got published by a small publishing house in Michigan. Then, when he was 60 years old, Hill had his first national release with I Don't Care If I Never Come Back, a book about baseball published by Simon & Schuster. The book was a popular and critical success, and his dedication page is something I treasure above any possession I own. To Steve Chandler, who cared about writing, cared about me, and one day said, "You should write a book about baseball." Nobody cares how old you are but you. People only care about what you can do, and you can do anything you want, at any age. Dr. Monty Buxbaum of the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York has been one of many scientists conducting research into the effects of aging on the brain. He is finding that it isn't aging that causes a brain to become less sharp, it's simply lack of use. The good news is that there isn't much difference between a 25-year-old brain and a 75-year-old brain, said Buxbaum, who used his positron emission tomography laboratory to scan the brains of more than 50 normal volunteers who ranged in age from 20 to 87. The memory loss and mental passivity that we used to believe was caused by aging has now been proven to be caused by simple lack of use. The brain is like the muscle in your arm. When you use it, it gets strong and quick. When you don't, it grows weak and slow. Research at the UCLA Brain Research Institute shows that the circuitry of the brain, the dendrites that branch between cells, grows with mental activity. Anything that's intellectually challenging, said Arnold Scheibel, head of the institute, can probably serve as a kind of stimulus for dendritic growth, which means it adds to the computational reserves in the brain. Translation, you can make yourself smarter. Whoever told you that you cannot increase your intelligence, asks Dr. Robert Jarvik, inventor of the artificial heart. Whoever taught you not to try? They didn't know. Flex your mind. Develop it. Use it. It will enrich you and bring you the love of life that thrives on truth and understanding. Research shows that mathematicians live longer than people in any other profession do, and we never used to know why. Now, in further studies done at UCLA, there has been a direct connection established between dendrite growth and longevity. Mental activity keeps you alive. Lose your mental challenges, and life itself fades away. Don't listen to the voice inside that talks about your age, or your IQ, or your life history, or anything it can slow you down with. Don't be seduced. You can start a highly motivated life right now by increasing the challenges you give your brain. 39. Come to your own rescue. After a seminar I gave in Vancouver, Canada, Don Beach, the sales manager of Bendorf Förster, one of that city's top businesses, sent me a tape of a song that he wanted me to hear. He said it reminded him of what I had been teaching his team about self-esteem. The song was a live performance by the old folk singing duo, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. The song is called Love, Truth, and Confidence. It's about how we foolishly chase after love and try to discover the ultimate truth, while ignoring something much more vital to our happiness, confidence. The chorus of the song goes like this: love and truth / you can find / any place, anywhere, anytime / but you can just say so long / once confidence is gone / nothing matters anymore. I never knew the true power of self-confidence until I began working with Dr. Nathaniel Branden and his wife Devers Branden. Both are authors and psychotherapists with the Branden Institute for Self-Esteem, and they have provided me with the most powerful insights I've ever received into how I operate as a human being. Dr. Branden's book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, is unlike any other psychology book on the market, because in addition to its eloquently written philosophy on how to build inner strength, it also contains a full year's worth of practical, powerful, user-friendly exercises to raise your own consciousness and self-esteem. His sentence completion exercises are so effective and exciting that if you do them, I can say without a trace of exaggeration, you can get tens of thousands of dollars worth of personal growth therapy for the price of a single book. Before you assume that Branden's notion of self-esteem is the same as that being bandied about by New Age educators, you must read his work and listen to his tapes. Most people today think others can bestow self-esteem on us. Such misguided thinking leads to phenomena such as classes without grades and work without standards for excellence. Perhaps you have heard about that little league group in Pennsylvania that wanted to eliminate keeping score from baseball games because of the damage that losing does to children's self-esteem. When we confuse pampering and coddling with instilling self-esteem, we really encourage the upbringing of young, sensitive children who have no inner strength whatsoever. When it comes time for such overpraised, underachieving kids to find success in the competitive global marketplace, they will be confused, fearful, and ineffective. The concepts taught by Nathaniel and Devers Branden are intellectually ruthless and unsentimental. Some of the best ideas go all the way back to Branden's years working with the great novelist and objectivist philosopher Ayn Rand. The Brandens have taught me how to objectively explore the weaknesses in my own thinking and to challenge the self-deception that was undermining my effectiveness in life. To trust one's mind and to know that one is worthy of happiness is the essence of self-esteem, writes Dr. Branden. The value of self-esteem lies not merely in the fact that it allows us to feel better, but that it allows us to live better, to respond to challenges and opportunities more resourcefully and appropriately. The two ideas contained in the Branden's work that have most helped me are, 1. You can't leave a place you've never been, and 2. No one is coming. I used to believe that I could run from all my frightening thoughts and beliefs about myself. But all that ever did was create deeper internal fears and conflicts. What I really needed was to get all my fears into the sunshine and demystify them. Once I systematically began to do that, I was able to dismantle those fears, as a bomb squad dismantles a bomb. Acceptance and full consciousness of those fears and the self-sabotaging behavior they led to was the place I had never been. Once I was in that place, I could leave. The notion that no one is coming was somehow terrifying to accept. The idea that no one was going to rescue me from my circumstances is an idea that I might never have accepted. That idea sounded too much like the final abandonment. It contradicted all my childhood self-programming. Many of us, even as grown-ups, devise very elaborate and subtle variations on the "I want my mommy" theme. The Brandens showed me that I could be much happier and more effective if I valued independence and self-responsibility above dependency on someone else. When you accept the idea that no one is coming, it is actually a very powerful moment, because it means that you are enough. No one needs to come. You can handle your problems yourself. You are, in a larger sense, appropriate to life. You can grow and get strong and generate your own happiness. And paradoxically, from that position of independence, truly great relationships can be built. because they aren't based on dependency and fear. They are based on mutual independence and love. Once, in a group therapy session, a client of Dr. Brandon's challenged him on his principle that no one is coming. "But Nathaniel," the client said, "it's not true. You came." "Correct," admitted Dr. Brandon, "but I came to say that no one is coming." 40. Find your soul purpose. How do you know what your true life is? Or what your soul's purpose is? How do you know how to live this purpose? The answers to these questions are yours for the taking, but you must seize the answers and not wait to be given them. No one will give you the answers. One good clue as to whether you are living your true life is how much you fear death. Do you fear death a lot, just a little, or not at all? When you say you fear death, wrote David Viscott, you are really saying that you fear you have not lived your true life. This fear cloaks the world in silent suffering. When mythologist Joseph Campbell recommended that we follow our bliss, many people misunderstood him. They thought he meant to become a pleasure seeker, a selfish hedonist from the me generation. Instead, he meant that in order to find out what your true life could be, you should look for clues in whatever makes you happy. What gets you excited? In the answer to that question, you'll discover where you can be of most service. You can't live your true life if you're not serving people, and you can't serve people very well if you are not excited about what you're doing. What makes you happy? I know I already asked, but the fear that cloaks the world in silent suffering comes from not asking that question enough times. In my own professional life, I have finally found that teaching makes me happy, writing makes me happy, and performing makes me happy. It took me many years of unhappiness to finally reach the point of despair necessary to ask the question, what makes me happy? I was the creative director for an ad agency and I was making a good deal of money producing commercials, meeting with clients, and designing marketing strategies. I could have done this type of work forever, but my horrible fear of death was my clue that I was not living my true life. People living deeply, wrote Anais Nin, have no fear of death. I was not living deeply. And it took me a long time to get clear answers to my question, what makes me happy? But any question we ask ourselves often enough will eventually yield the right answer. The problem is, we quit asking. Fortunately for me, in this rare instance of persistence in the face of extreme discomfort, I didn't quit asking. The answer came to me in the form of a memory, so colorful it was almost like a movie scene. I was driving at night in my car 10 years earlier, and I was as happy as I had ever been. In fact, I was driving around aimlessly so that I could keep my feeling of happiness preserved and contained within that car. I didn't want anything to interrupt it. It was so profound that it lasted for hours. The occasion had been a speech I had just given. The subject of it was my recovery from an addiction, and the night that I spoke I was running such a high fever, and I had such a fear of speaking in public that I tried to call the talk off. My hosts wouldn't hear of it. Somehow I made it to the podium and, probably because my fever and flu were so intense, I spoke freely, without caution or self-consciousness. The more I spoke about freedom from addiction, the more excited I got. My creativity just soared. I remember the audience laughing as I spoke. I remember them jumping to their feet and cheering when I was finished. It was the most remarkable night of my life. Somehow I had reached people in a way I'd never reached people before, and their own expressions of joy lifted me higher than I had ever been. It was that memory of that moonlit night, driving in my car, that came back to me 10 years later after I'd spent weeks repeating to myself the question, what makes me happy? Now I had the picture, but I had no idea how to act on it. But at least I knew what my true life was, and I knew that I wasn't living it. Then one day one of my major advertising clients asked me to hire a motivational speaker for a big breakfast meeting they were having for their sales staff. I didn't know of anyone in Arizona who was any good. The only motivational speakers I was familiar with were the national ones whose tapes I'd listened to so often in my car. People such as Wayne Dyer, Tom Peters, Anthony Robbins, Alan Watts, and Nathaniel Brandon. But Alan Watts was dead, and the rest were probably far too expensive for our little breakfast. So I called Kirk Nelson, a friend of mine who was sales manager at KTAR in Phoenix, and asked his advice. The only person in Arizona worth hiring is Dennis Deaton, he said. He speaks all over the country, and he's usually booked, but if you can get him, do, because he's great. I finally reached Deaton in Utah, where he was giving seminars on time management. He agreed to come back to Phoenix in time for our breakfast and give a 45-minute motivational talk. Kirk Nelson was right. Deaton was impressive. He held the audience spellbound as he told stories that illustrated his ideas about the power that people have over their thoughts, and the mastery that they can achieve over their thinking. When he finished speaking and came back to the table where we had been sitting, I shook his hand and thanked him, and I found myself making a silent vow that someday soon I would be working with this man. It wasn't long after that he and I were indeed working together. It was at a company called Kuma Learning, Deaton's corporate training facility based in Phoenix, Arizona. Although I began with Kuma as its marketing director, creating advertisements, video scripts, and direct mail pieces, I soon worked my way up to the position of seminar presenter. My first big thrill came when Deaton and I were both invited to speak at a national convention of carpet cleaning companies. It was the first time I had ever shared the stage with him, and I was to go on first. He was in the audience when I spoke, and I have to admit I had worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life in preparation for this event. The participants had heard Deaton before at previous conventions and loved him, but they'd never heard me. After my presentation was over, they clapped enthusiastically, and as Deaton passed me on his way to the stage, he was beaming with pride as he shook my hand. Unlike myself, Dennis Deaton has very little professional jealousy of other speakers. He was happy for my success. I have to admit that my favorite moment occurred when, after he was introduced, someone in the audience teasingly shouted out, "Dennis who?" Many people get confused and believe that living their true life means getting lucky and finding a suitable job with an appreciative boss somewhere. What I have come to realize is that you can live your true life anywhere, in any job, with any boss. First find out what makes you happy, and then start doing it. If writing makes you happy, and you're not writing for a living, start up a company newsletter or your own website. When I first realized that speaking and teaching made me happy, I started a free weekly workshop. I didn't wait until something was offered to me. Whatever goal you want to reach, you can reach it 10 times faster if you are happy. In my sales training and consulting, I noticed that happy salespeople sell at least twice as much as unhappy salespeople. Most people think that the successful salespeople are happy because they are selling more and making more money. Not true. They are selling more and making more money because they are happy. As J.D. Salinger's character Seymour says in Fanny and Zoe, this happiness is strong stuff. Happiness is the strongest stuff in the world. It is more energizing than a cup of hot espresso on a cold morning. It is more mind-expanding than a dose of acid. It is more intoxicating than a glass of champagne under the stars. If you refuse to cultivate happiness in yourself, you will not be of extraordinary service to others, and you will not have the energy to create who you want to be. There is no goal better than this one, to know as you lie on your deathbed that you lived your true life, because you did what made you happy. 41. Get up on the right side. Since I was a child, I've always been intrigued with the idea that you could have a great day just by getting up on the right side of the bed. Later in life, during my years as a largely unsuccessful songwriter, one of the few successes I had was with a country rock song that I co-wrote with Fred Knipe and Duncan Stitt. It was called The Right Side of the Wrong Bed. Today my fascination is not so much with the right side of the bed as it is with the right side of the head, or to be more precise, the right side of the brain. In the 1930s, brain surgeons discovered the different functions of the two halves of the brain while working with epileptics. In 1950, Roger W. Sperry of the University of Chicago, and later of Caltech, made the greatest breakthroughs in discovering that dreams, energy, and creative insight come from the right side of the brain, while linear, logical, short-term, and short-sighted thinking come from the left. The best explanation of how whole brain thinking surpasses left brain thinking or right brain thinking is in a book written by British philosopher Colin Wilson called Frankenstein's Castle. Wilson reveals that we have more control over drawing vital energy and creative ideas from the right brain than we ever realized. And what stimulates the right brain the most is a high sense of purpose. If you had to carry a heavy sack of sand across town, your left brain might get upset and tell you that you were doing something boring and tedious. However, if your child were injured badly and she weighed the same as the huge bag of sand, you'd carry her the same distance to the hospital with a surprising surge of vital energy sent from the right brain. That's what purpose does to the brain. Self-motivation gets more and more exciting as the left brain gets better and better at telling the right brain what to do. 42. Let your whole brain play. Suicide rates go down during times of war because many people begin to feel useful and challenged enough times during the day. This encourages them to use both sides of the brain harmonically. In less eventful times, people tend to slip into using just one side of the brain and get trapped into feeling useless. Most people unconsciously wait for an external crisis, such as a threatened bankruptcy or an attack on the street or the burning down of their home or an unwanted divorce or a war, to kick in their whole brain thinking. But that passive misuse of the brain leads to a life of reaction rather than creation. When Oliver Wendell Holmes said most people go to their graves with their music still in them, he just as easily could have said that most people live in their left brain only. When Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation, he was describing what life is like if you stay trapped in left, linear, short-sighted thinking. But the irony is that the left brain has gotten an unfairly negative reputation, simply because people stay trapped there. When people learn that the left brain is there to connect with the right, then it takes on new power and function. When people stay trapped in linear, flat, and logical left brain thinking and never activate the creative right side of the brain, they lose their love of life. The right brain comes alive during dreaming at night while the left brain sleeps. But it is possible, as artists, poets, and saints can attest, to have the same two-sided interplay that we had as children, while we are awake. We simply have to fire it up by using the left brain to call on the right. This is what happens when we make love, play games, write poetry, hold a baby, or face a threatening crisis. The left brain commands the right brain to come alive and get involved. That is when you get whole brain thinking, or what psychologist Abraham Maslow called peak experiences. The 3 best ways to activate whole brain thinking are through 1. Goal visualization, 2. Joyful work, and 3. Revitalizing play. Rather than wait for external crises to appear, create internal challenge games of your own goals and purposes that lead you in growth toward the motivated person you want to become. The real excitement in studies of the power of the right brain lies in its suggestion of a neurological basis for personal transformation. It's not just motivational puff or secular evangelism to say that we possess unlimited creative energy, and we can use it to create the lives we want. In fact, writes Colin Wilson, we can learn to live on a far, far higher level of power. And that is what the left brain was intended for. Its farsightedness gives it the ability to summon power. Yet it hardly makes use of this ability. It could be compared to a man who possesses a magic machine that will create gold coins so that he could, if he wanted, pay off the national debt and abolish poverty. But he is so lazy and stupid that he never bothers to make more than a couple of coins every day, just enough to see him through until the evening. Or perhaps he is not lazy, only afraid of emptying the machine. If so, the fear is unnecessary. It is magical, and cannot be emptied. Most people regard their right brain with a sense of wonder. They think inspiring thoughts came to them out of the blue. Last night I had the strangest dream, they will say, not knowing how much control they really have over that magical machine. 43. Get your stars out. Terry Hill is a writer who has lived all over the world and has been a friend of mine since we met each other in the 6th grade in Birmingham, Michigan. His short story, Cafes Are for Handicapping, features an intriguing character named Joe Warner who liked to tell stories about horse racing. Joe Warner told the story of being in the press box at Belmont when Secretariat put away the Triple Crown by 31 lengths. And I looked beside me when he was coming down the stretch at all these hardened, cigar-chomping New York newspapermen, and they all had tears running down their cheeks like little babies. Course I couldn't see too clear myself for the tears in my eyes. I was 23 at the time. And it was the first Triple Crown in my lifetime. Imagine that. That story brought me even closer to a question I've been asking all my life. Why do we cry when we see huge accomplishments? Why do we cry at weddings? Why do I cry when the blind girl jumps with her horse in the movie Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken? Or when the Titans win the game in Denzel Washington's Remember the Titans? Why did those sports writers cry to see that horse win by 31 lengths? This is my theory. We weep for the winner inside of all of us. In these poignant moments, we cry because we know for a fact that there is something in us that could be every bit as great as what we are watching. We are, for that moment, the untapped greatness we are seeing. But we get tears in our eyes, because we know the greatness isn't being realized. We could have been like that, but we aren't. Terry Hill also gives public talks on creativity. His own work in advertising and public relations throughout the years has won countless awards and, as one might expect, he presents some learned and sophisticated formulae for creating. But he finishes all his talks by saying it is really a simple thing to be creative. All you do is get your stars out. That's how you tap into the untapped you. His reference is to Seymour, an introduction by J.D. Salinger. Seymour is writing a letter to his brother Buddy, who has chosen to become a professional writer. Seymour tells his brother that writing has always been more than a profession, that it has been more like Buddy's religion. He says that Buddy will be asked 2 very profound questions when he dies about the writing he was doing. 1. Were most of your stars out? And 2. Were you busy writing your heart out? Terry Hill's advice to his audiences on the subject of creativity is to make sure you get your stars out. This is another way of saying let the stars that are in you shine freely. Don't force them out. Just let them shine. Although Hill's audiences are usually advertising people and writers, his recommendations apply to all of us. Our lives are ours to create. Do we want to create them in a lackluster way, or do we want to be inspiring? When we write our plans and dreams, we need to write our hearts out. In shooting for the stars, it's time to get a bit wild. Wild hearts can't be broken. 44. Just make everything up. Sometimes in my seminars I will ask the people in the audience to raise their hands if they think of themselves as creative. I've never had more than a fourth of the audience raise their hands. I then asked the people how many of them were able to make things up when they were younger, make up names for their dolls, make up a game to play, make up a story for their parents when the truth looked less promising. All hands go up. So, what's the difference? You made stuff up as a child, but you're not a creative adult? The difference is that we have charged the word creative with meaning something truly extraordinary. Picasso was creative. Meryl Streep is creative. Wyclef Jean is creative. But me? So one of the ways to get started creating goals and action plans is to just make them up, like you did as a kid. Think of creating in simpler terms. Think of it as something all humans do very easily. French psychologist Émile Cassed, always think of what you have to do as easy and it will be. 45. Put on your game face. I used to hate to study for tests in high school. Nothing could have been more boring. But one day Terry Hill and I decided to make a game of it. We decided to challenge each other by making up mock tests for each other. The only rules were that we had to ask 30 questions, and the answers had to appear in the text that we were going to be tested on in the classroom the next day. Because we were both competitive and loved games, we worked very hard to come up with the most ridiculously difficult questions we could devise. What was Magellan's middle name? How many of Custer's children were daughters? What is the 23rd word in the Gettysburg Address? We also tried to anticipate the other's toughest questions and learn the obscure answers. On the morning of the real test we presented each other with our own tests, always twice as hard as the real test. As we each took each other's test there was much happy yelling and laughter. But by the time we took the real test in school, we were more than ready. In fact, we often looked across the classroom at each other during the real test and rolled our eyes with disdain at the simplicity and stupidity of the real exam. By changing our study into a challenging game, we had taken the work out of the task and replaced it with play. Did we work as hard? Harder. But by transforming work into play, we increased our energy and our sense of creativity. Most people who play a lot of golf or tennis work much harder at their games than they do at work. All people work harder at play than they do at work, because there's no resistance. Golfers are working harder on the golf course than they are at their professions. They don't always know this, although their spouses usually do, because it doesn't feel like work, it feels like fun. They bring more energy, innovation, and zest to what they're doing out on the course because it's a game. They also bring an ongoing commitment to increasing their skills. Everyone is interested in getting better at the games they play. As for the effect of games on energy, consider a bunch of guys playing poker all night. Because poker is a game, people can play it all night until the sun comes up. When they finally come home to sleep, you might be tempted to ask them, how did you manage to stay up all night? Were you drinking coffee and cokes? No, they confess, they were drinking beer. But shouldn't beer slow you down and make you tired? Not if you are playing a game. In fact, you'll also learn that they were probably smoking cigars and eating junk snacks as well. Not generally known as stimulants. What was stimulating was the game. The joy of competition. Playwright Noel Coward once said, "Work is more fun than fun." I included that quote in a seminar guidebook for a sales group a year ago, and one of the participants in the back of the room raised his hand and said, "Yeah, Steve, who is this Noel Coward guy?" I figure with a quote like that he's either a porn star or a professional golfer. That line got a great laugh at my expense, but it also revealed a truth, which almost all humor does. People believe that the fun jobs are always somewhere else. If only I could get a job like that. If only I had been a pro golfer. But the truth is that fulfilling and fun work can be found in anything. The more we consciously introduce game-playing elements, personal bests listed, goals, time limits, competition with self or others, record-keeping, etc., the more fun the activity becomes. I recently worked on a project with a young man in Phoenix who was selling 3 times as much office equipment as the average salesperson on his team. He said he didn't understand his coworkers who got depressed easily, took rejection hard, and struggled with putting their deals together. I don't take this that seriously, he smiled. I love all my sales challenges. The tougher the prospect is, the more fun I have selling. There is absolutely nothing personal or depressing in any of this for me. When I meet a new sales prospect, it's a chess game. Whatever it is you have to do, whether it's a major project at work or a huge cleaning job at home, turning it into a game will always bring you higher levels of energy and motivation. 46. Discover active relaxation. There is a huge difference between active relaxation and passive relaxation. When we play video games, play computer games, play cards, work in the garden, walk the dog, go into a chat room, or play chess, we are interacting with the unexpected, and our minds are responding. All of these activities increase personal creativity and intellectual motivation. They are all active pursuits. Active relaxation refreshes and restores the mind. It keeps it flexible and toned for thinking. Great thinkers have known this secret for a long time. Winston Churchill used to paint to relax. Albert Einstein played the violin. They could relax one part of the brain while stimulating another. When they returned to workday pursuits, they were fresher and sharper than ever. Most of us try to deaden the mind in order to relax. We rent mindless videos, read pulp fiction, drink, smoke, and eat until we're foggy and bloated. The problem with this form of relaxation is that it dulls our spirit and makes it hard to come back to consciousness. I accidentally discovered the restorative powers of video and computer games when I played some with my then 9-year-old son Bobby. What began as a way to make him happy and spend time with him became a brain-challenging pursuit. The complexity of computer football, basketball, and hockey games now rivals chess and the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle. It requires stimulating recreational thinking. Thinking is the hardest work we do, said Henry Ford, which is why so few people ever do it. But when we find ways to link thinking to recreation, our lives get richer. We become players in the game of life and not just spectators. 47. Make today a masterpiece. Most of us think our lives accumulate. We think they are adding up to something. We think of our lives as being strung together like a long smoky train, so that we can add new freight cars when we're feeling right, and dump the others on a siding somewhere when we're not. But when basketball legend John Wooden's father said to him, "Make each day your masterpiece," Wooden knew something profound: life is now. Life is not later on. And the more we hypnotize ourselves into thinking we have all the time in the world to do what we want to do, the more we sleepwalk past life's finest opportunities. Self-motivation flows from the importance we attach to today. John Wooden was the most successful college basketball coach of all time. His UCLA teams won 10 national championships in a 12-year time span. Wooden created a major portion of his coaching and living philosophy from one thought, a single sentence passed on to him by his father when Wooden was a little boy: make each day your masterpiece. While other coaches would try to gear their players toward important games in the future, Wooden always focused on today. His practice sessions at UCLA were every bit as important as any championship game. In his philosophy, there was no reason not to make today the proudest day of your life. There was no reason not to play as hard in practice as you do in a game. He wanted every player to go to bed each night thinking, "Today I was at my best." Most of us, however, don't want it to be this way. If someone asks us if today can be used as a model to judge our entire life by, we would shriek, "Oh no! It isn't one of my better days. Give me a year or two and I'll live a day, I'm certain of it, that you can use to represent my life." The key to personal transformation is in your willingness to do very tiny things, but to do them today. Transformation is not an all-or-nothing game, it's a work in progress. A little touch here and a small touch there is what makes your day, and, therefore, your life, great. Today is a microcosm of your entire life. It is your whole life in miniature. You were born when you woke up, and you'll die when you go to sleep. It was designed this way, so that you could live your whole life in a day. 48. Enjoy all your problems. Every solution has a problem. You can't have one without the other. So why do we say that we hate problems? Why do we claim to want a hassle-free existence? When someone is emotionally sick, why do we say, "He's got problems"? Deep down, where our wisdom lives, we know that problems are good for us. When my daughter's teacher talks to me during open house and tells me that my daughter is going to be working more problems in math than she worked last year, I think that's wonderful. Why do I think it's wonderful when my daughter gets more problems to solve, if I think problems are a problem? Because somehow we know that problems are good for our children. By solving problems, our kids will become more self-sufficient. They'll trust their own minds more. They'll see themselves as problem solvers. Because we ourselves are so superstitious about our own problems, we tend to run from them rather than solve them. We have demonized problems to such a degree that they are like monsters that live under the bed. And by not solving them during the day, we tremble over them at night. When people took their problems to the legendary insurance giant W. Clement Stone, he used to shout out, "You've got a problem? That's great." It's a wonder he wasn't shot by someone, given our culture's deep superstition about problems. But problems are not to be feared. Problems are not curses. Problems are simply tough games for the athletes of the mind, and true athletes always long to get a game going. In The Road Less Traveled, one of M. Scott Peck's central themes is that problems call forth our wisdom and our courage. One of the best ways to approach a problem is in a spirit of play, the same way you approach a chess game or a challenge to play one-on-one playground basketball. One of my favorite ways to play with a problem, especially one that seems hopeless, is to ask myself, what is a funny way to solve this problem? What would be a hilarious solution? That question never fails to open up fresh new avenues of thought. Every problem in your life, said Richard Bach, author of Illusions, carries a gift inside it. He is right. But we have to be thinking that way first, or the gift will never appear. In his groundbreaking studies of natural healing, Dr. Andrew Wall suggests that we even regard illness as a gift. Because illness can be such a powerful stimulus to change, he writes in Spontaneous Healing, perhaps it is the only thing that can force some people to resolve their deepest conflicts. Successful patients often come to regard it as the greatest opportunity they ever had for personal growth and development, truly a gift. Seeing illness as a misfortune, especially one that is undeserved, may obstruct the healing system. Coming to see the illness as a gift that allows you to grow may unlock it. If you see your problems as curses, the motivation you're looking for in life will be hard to find. If you learn to love the opportunities your problems present, then your motivational energy will rise. 49. Remind your mind. Perhaps you have noted an idea in this book, or another recent book that you've read, that you want to hold on to. It might be an idea that you knew, the moment you saw it, would always be useful to you. You might even have underlined it for future reference. But what if the book goes on the shelf, or gets loaned to a friend, and is forevermore out of sight and out of mind? This is a very common experience, and there is a remedy. Start treating self-motivational ideas as if they were songs. You can find ways to rewind these ideas so they'll play again and again until you can't get them out of your head. That's how belief systems are restructured to suit our goals. Place the thought you want to remember into the jingle track in your brain so that it can't get out. You can create a new self by learning the beliefs you want to live by, one thought at a time. Learn these thoughts as you would the lyrics for a song you had to perform on stage. A friend of mine used to learn his parts in musicals by placing index cards with song lyrics all over his office, home, and bathroom mirror. He sometimes had them on the dashboard of his car. Why? He was making a conscious visual effort to reach the backside of his own mind. The trick is to keep this motivation going. To deliberately feed your spirit with the optimistic ideas you want to live by. Anytime a thought, sentence, or paragraph inspires you or opens up your thinking, you need to capture it, like a butterfly in a net, and later release it into your own field of consciousness. For me, discovering an exciting idea in a book or magazine is like a true peak experience. It makes the world bright and incomprehensible. I get that tingle in my spine. I get that oh, yes, feeling. Why am I this lucky? And the more I deliberately fill my mind with the words and phrases that originally stirred the peak experience, the easier it is to remember that life is good. This, writes Colin Wilson in New Pathways in Psychology, is why people who have a peak experience can go on repeating them, because it is simply a matter of reminding yourself of something you have already seen and which you know to be real. In this sense, it is like any other recognition that suddenly dawns on you, for example, the recognition of the greatness of some composer or artist whom you had formerly found difficult or incomprehensible, or the recognition of how to solve a certain problem. Once such a recognition dawns, it is easy to re-establish contact with it, because it is there like some possession, waiting for you to return to it. Children. Bye. During my talks on self-motivation, one of the questions I'm asked most often is, how do I keep this going? People say, I love what I've learned today, but I've often gone to seminars that got me motivated, and then a few days later I was back to my old pessimistic self, doing exactly what I used to do. If I were in the mood to be blunt, I would answer the question this way. Why, if you love what you've learned about self-motivation, would you ask me how to keep it going in your life? The person in this room best equipped to answer your question is you. So I'll ask you, how will you keep this going in your life? I bet you could give me 10 ways you could do it. And I bet that if this were a foreign language you had to learn, you would set aside a certain amount of time each day to review it, to read it out loud, and to make certain you learned it. I bet you'd buy tapes or CDs for your car and even arrange small study groups. So the real question is this, is mastering the art of motivation as important as learning another language? Even a single phrase, placed prominently in a home or office, can have a huge impact on your life. In Arnold Schwarzenegger's childhood home in a poor town in Austria, his father framed and hung the simple words, joy through strength. It's not hard to see what effect that idea had on Arnold's life. Once while I was attending a Werner Erhard seminar, I had some free time during a break, so I wrote myself a letter. I put down all the ideas I wanted to remember from the seminar and I sealed them in an envelope. I took it home and a month later I mailed it to myself. When I opened it at work and read it, it was like a fresh experience all over again. I was so impressed by how effective this was for me that I employed the idea in one of my own seminars. I had everyone in the audience write out the important insights they'd received and what they intended to do differently in their lives from this moment on. When the people were finished, I asked them to seal the letters into the envelopes I'd provided and address the envelopes to themselves. I told them I would hold them for a month and then mail them all. The reports I got back were remarkable. Some people said seeing those thoughts written to themselves in their own handwriting brought the whole seminar back to them. They felt a rush of excitement and a new commitment to take action. Are you willing to remind yourself to treat yourself to your own best thoughts? Are you willing to set visual traps and ambushes so you'll always see words and thoughts you know you want to remember? 50. Get down and get small. The fewer goals you set each day, the more you feel pushed around by people and events that are beyond your control. You suffer from a sense of powerlessness. Rather than creating the reality you want, you are only reacting to the world around you. You have much more control over the activities of your day than you realize. By increasing your conscious use of small objectives, you will see the larger objectives coming into reality. Most people participating in the free enterprise system have become thoroughly convinced of the power of setting large and specific, long-range goals for themselves. Career goals, yearly goals, and monthly performance goals are always on the mind of a person with ambition. But often those people overlook altogether the power of small goals set during the day that give energy to the day and a sense of achieving a lot of small wins along the way. In his psychological masterpiece, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi refers to large goals as outcome goals and small goals as process goals. The beauty of process goals is that they are always within your immediate power to achieve. For example, you might set a process goal of making 4 important telephone calls before lunch. On a sheet of paper you make 4 boxes, and as you make each call you fill in a box, and when the 4 are made, you file the paper in your goal folder and go enjoy lunch. Because you've earned it. You can set process goals, for example, before a conversation with a person. I want to find these 3 things out, I want to ask these 4 questions, I want to make these 2 requests, and I want to pay my client 1 compliment before I leave. Process goals give you total focus. When you are constantly setting process goals, you are in more control of your day, and you feel a sense of skillful self-motivation. At the end of the day, or the beginning of the next day, you can check your progress toward your outcome goals. You can adjust your process goals to take you closer to the outcomes you want, and always keep the 2 in harmony. Let's say it's now the end of a long, hard day. You have a half hour before you have to go home. If you're not in the habit of setting process goals, you might say, I guess I ought to do some paperwork or make a call or 2 before I go home. You look at the pile of paper on your desk, or you mindlessly thumb through phone numbers, and all of a sudden someone comes by your desk to chat. Because you have nothing specific to do, you engage in conversation and, before you know it, the half hour is gone and you have to go home. Even though you didn't leave anything specific unfinished, you still have that vague feeling of having wasted time. Now what happens if you use that half hour to set and achieve a process goal? Before I go home tonight, I'm going to send out 2 good letters of introduction with all my marketing material included. Now you have a process goal and only a half hour in which to do it. When the person comes by your desk to chat, you tell him you'll have to talk to him later because you've got some things that have to get out by 5. People who get into the swing of setting small goals all day long report a much higher level of consciousness and energy. It's as if they are athletes constantly coaching themselves through an ongoing game. They are happier people because their day is being created by the power inside their own minds, and not by the power of the world around them.